Welcome back to AP Euro Review with Miss Clark. And we are getting into some of the more complicated parts of time period 3. Time period 3 is a pretty long section from quarter 3, but let's get right into it. So first off, for today's video, we're going to talk about the growth of democracy. And so it's kind of this endless battle between conservatives and liberals. And I don't want you to get too confused over like what we think of as far as liberals and conservatives in American society today, because in Europe in the 1800s that's going to mean something different. And I apologize if it's a little bit loud. Evidently Mr. Gilson's like having a party in his room upstairs after school or something, so I don't know. Okay, so to start off with Great Britain. So Great Britain during this time period is going to be the most liberal as far as giving the most rights to people in Europe during this time period. It's kind of started off with the Corn Laws of 1815, when it's raising a ton of prices for corn when times are really bad. And that caused a lot of riots, which caused a party group called the Anti-Corn League, which is not the fact that they hate corn, but they hate the corn laws. And this is going to be when the Tory party, who's going to be the Conservative Party, actually relents and gives in and decides to repeal the Corn Laws, which is going to be one of the few instances where the Conservatives relent to the liberal viewpoint. Another big battle for democracy that's going to happen is that the House of Commons had not been reapportioned since 1688, which means that they had not rearranged how much of a vote certain areas get based off of population since 1688, and this is in the 1830s, so it's been a little while. And so they passed this thing called the Great Reform Bill that ended up expanding the electorate, giving a lot more votes. This is also when the Chartist movement is going to take place, which is advocating for universal male suffrage, and it ends up taking place, and there's universal male, not female, but male suffrage in Great Britain during this time period. And a big proponent of this Chartism movement is going to be the Whig Party. And so the Whig Party is going to be your liberal party, and they're going to work to try to expand that electorate, getting people to vote. Labor unions are going to be legalized during this time period. Free public education, that's going to be a requirement. And this is when you start to see that social welfare state on how can the government and not just the church alleviate the problems in society that is so heavily prevalent in Europe today, specifically in Great Britain. Moving on to France. So this time period, by the way, is called the Age of Metternich. Metternich is going to be an Austrian prime minister. And if you want to know more about Metternich, watch my next video, but this time period is going to be from about 1815 in the Congress of Vienna to 1848, where there's going to be a whole bunch of revolutions. Going back to 1815, Louis XVIII got power after the fall of Napoleon, so they put the brother of Louis XVI back into power, but he's not really giving a ton of power to a big group of electorate. He's only giving it to small groups of the bourgeoisie. And his successor, who's also going to be another brother, is going to be Charles X, and he's going to be even more suppressive, and that's going to end up causing the French people to riot, doing what they do best. And then he ended up having to abdicate the throne in 1830. This is when there's a whole bunch of contention over like who's going to take over this new throne. And so the Marquis de Lafayette, who's going to be this big name over France because he helped win the American Revolution, he is going to help to pass Louis Philippe to become the bourgeoisie king. So the way that the bourgeoisie king, or Louis Philippe, got to be the king is through the July Revolution, which ended up getting a whole bunch of people massacred in order for him to gain the throne. Once he gains the throne, he did try to protect business, but he's leaving a lot of the proletariat unprotected. There's a lot of corruption in his government, which caused more protests, and he ended up having to abdicate the throne 18 years later in 1848. This is that 1848 is a super, super important year, so that's definitely going to be one of those years that you're going to want to remember, because this liberal ideology that gets passed over, that there should be universal rights, this is what's going to push forward into the rest of Europe. So basically every single country in Europe, except for Great Britain and Russia, are gonna have a massive revolution in 1848. And in every single instance, almost, the conservatives are gonna win. I'm gonna talk about that a little bit more in a bit, but part of this uprising in 1848 is called the June Day Uprisings, when basically the workers are going to riot over the closed national workshops. France is not doing well, and so they decide to take a piece from the past and repeat the past. So once again, they have gotten rid of a member of the royal family, and they replaced him eventually with none other than Napoleon Bonaparte's nephew, Louis Napoleon Bonaparte. Because that really worked out super great for them the last time. He becomes the president of the Second Republic. If you remember that there is 5 republics in France. The 5th one is the one that is currently in charge of France, and the first one came during the French Revolution. Louis Napoleon comes and is trying to say that I will advocate for this conservative class. This conservative class of people is going to be staunch proponents of keeping that status quo, trying to make sure everything is across the board good for basically the monarchy and the bourgeoisie, the rich. So it goes so well for Louis Napoleon Bonaparte that he declares himself emperor over France, just like his uncle, and he becomes Napoleon III. When he first gets on the throne, everybody really likes this guy, and so they don't really mind that he declares himself emperor. He has a lot of internal improvements as far as building canals and improving roads and things like that. He also, at the first part of his career, they have a great economy going on in France during the time, and when the economy is good, everybody loves the person who's in charge. However, the biggest downfall that happened during Napoleon III's reign is, number 1, he gets involved in the Crimean War. So the Crimean War is from 1853 to 1856, and basically the Ottoman Empire is failing. They ultimately fail after World War I. And the countries of Europe are trying to determine who's going to have power over the Black Sea for shipping. And Britain and France decide for once to join together, amazing, and they fight against the Russians, which ends up draining a lot of French resources. The Franco-Prussian War comes right after that, because this was Napoleon III's way of like, oh, this will be a really easy win, we can get some free land, like, not free, but cheap land, and it'll be great. However, they didn't trust the fact that, or didn't acknowledge the fact that Germany is starting to unify, and so they're really powerful under Bismarck, and Germany totally crushed France during this system, which didn't really look that great for Napoleon III. So Napoleon III ends up getting booted out, and they create the Third Republic in France. And this Third Republic is going to be very unstable. It ends up crashing basically after World War I. Part of the reason why it's failing is because they have a multi-party system. It's not like the United States where they have a bi-party system. There is this thing called, they set up this thing called the Chamber of Deputies, which basically is going to be a little bit like Congress, or more like the House of Representatives, and those are going to be elected, and then they're going to also have the Senate, and the Senate is elected by indirect election, and then they have a president who's going to be responsible for the Chamber of Deputies. And really the only thing that they managed to accomplish during this time period that's really of note is going to be universal male suffrage, just like Great Britain. Another important point to remember during this time period is going to be the Dreyfus Affair. If they ever ask you a question about anti-Semitism or Jewish history, the Dreyfus Affair is going to be very important. It is basically when a Jewish officer was kicked out of the French military because, officially he said that it was because he was Jewish, ended up going to court, and in prison he got accused of doing all these things, and it ended up being really looking bad for France. So remember, if you're ever writing an essay about the anti-Semitism, make sure to mention that Dreyfus Affair. And so that's going to be the biggest growth that we're going to see in democracy, and then my next video is going to be how did we suppress democracy during this time period from the conservative side.